I've recently been rewatching Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and if you've followed me for a while now, you'll know that this is my favorite Star Trek series. On this latest rewatch, though, I've noticed quite a few concerning things about the Federation. This is specifically about episode 23 of the fourth season, To the Death, in which the Federation chooses to ally itself with a fascist state who is their enemy against an insurgent force of ex-Dominion soldiers also fighting against said fascist state. I should back up, though. I'm sure many of you probably aren't familiar with Star Trek Deep Space Nine, the Dominion, or the Jem'Hadar, so I'm just going to give you a quick rundown on it. Deep Space Nine follows the crew of the eponymous Deep Space Nine station owned by the planetary government of Bajor and managed by the United Federation of Planets under Captain Benjamin Sisko. The Federation is an Earth-based, multi-planetary alliance in the Alpha Quadrant, and they acquired Deep Space Nine after the Bajoran people overthrew the Cardassians, who had occupied their planet in a brutal dictatorship for 50 years. After the Cardassians were forced off of Bajor, it was discovered by the Federation that there was one of the very few stable wormholes in existence adjacent to the station that led to the Gamma Quadrant, a previously unexplored region of the galaxy, or at least unexplored by the Federation themselves. In the Gamma Quadrant, the Federation made contact with a similar multiplanetary nation called the Dominion, but unlike the Federation, they operate through terror and strict, brutal control. The leaders of the Dominion are the Founders, a race of shape-shifting aliens who despise and subjugate all other races, who they refer to as the Solids, or other races who are unable to shapeshift. To accomplish these goals, the Founders use a genetically altered race known as the Jem'Hadar, who have had their physiology modified to be very violent, wholly devoted to the Dominion, and as an added measure, they're completely addicted to the substance known as Ketracel White that only the Founders can provide to them. What this does is if they withdraw from Ketracel White is they die. So, there's no possible way that they can realistically start an uprising against the Dominion. Kind of fucked up if you ask me, but, whatever, it's a TV show. In Season 4, tensions between the Dominion and the Federation are rising, and all-out war seems to be right on the horizon. By this point already in the season, the Founders have used their shape-shifting ability to undermine planetary leaderships and influence major decisions. One example of this was a war that was somewhat engineered between the Klingon Empire and the Cardassian Central Command that managed to erode the positive relationship shared between the Klingons and the Federation and destroy most Cardassian infrastructure. The Dominion had managed to convince the Klingons that there were Dominion infiltrators within the Cardassian ranks, and the Klingons, being the Klingons, decided to invade, and all of the diplomatic relationships that had been built up by Curzon Dax between the two were completely erased, and the two big powers in the Alpha Quadrant almost delved into war themselves. And both the Cardassians and the Dominion in Canyon are kind of similar to the Nazis in real world. They're both truly, truly evil organizations that in the series have committed irredeemable atrocities, but both of whom the Federation frequently enters into tentative alliances with. In fact, in the case of the Cardassians, the crew of Deep Space Nine collectively becomes almost kind of friends with Gul Dukat, the leader of the Cardassian occupying force on Bajor, as well as Elim Garak, an outcast Cardassian who had tortured Bajorans as a career in the highest office of the Central Command, the Obsidian Order. Throughout the series, Garak repeatedly demonstrated his willingness and even desire to rejoin the Cardassian Empire in his former capacity. And yet, despite this, he's allowed free reign among the station and even owns a tailor shop and collects totally information about the Federation and I'm sure passes it along to the Cardassians. After the conclusion of the Cardassian War, one of the conditions of surrender was the establishment of a demilitarized zone and the abandonment of Federation colonies therein. Of course, the inhabitants of those colonies are not going to simply uproot their lives and leave their homes, so faced with constant attacks from the Cardassians and no support from the Federation in terms of supplies, ships, or even, most fundamentally, moral support, these colonists form a terrorist group to fight against the Cardassians known as the Maquis. I say all this. It's not really relevant to the episode at hand, but just to demonstrate, despite the Cardassians being worse than the Nazis, the Federation sides with them over the Maquis, a group of under-equipped farmers who are just trying to protect themselves, And many episodes of Deep Space Nine and Star Trek Voyager deal with the Federation's apathy towards its own civilians' well-being. Anyway, back to the actual topic at hand. The episode To the Death begins with the immediate aftermath of the station having been attacked by a Jem'Hadar ship. The station is in disarray, and many supplies have been stolen by this group of Jem'Hadar. But, ultimately, there were some civilian casualties aboard the station, and there were many members of the Federation who were injured, but the stolen supplies amounted to things like space wrenches and vintage car manuals and stuff, really nothing of significant substance. So in response, Benjamin Sisko takes the Defiant, the ship permanently assigned to Deep Space Nine, and follows the Jem'Hadar into the wormhole and tracks their warp signature in the direction of a separate Jem'Hadar warship that has been similarly attacked and is emitting a distress signal. Right as their warp core is about to go critical, the crew of the Defiant beams the Jem'Hadar and their Vorta superior to the Defiant, minus their weapons. For context, the Vorta are the race assigned by the founders to lead the Jem'Hadar in their stead. They're similarly, wholly devoted to the founders. But these Jem'Hadar that they beam aboard explain that they and Deep Space Nine were both attacked by a group of Jem'Hadar rebels that had decided to fight against the Dominion, and they had discovered one of the last remaining pieces of Iconian technology, an Iconian gateway. At this point in time, Iconian gateways were known technology. They were first discovered by the Romulans in the Star Trek Next Generation episode Contagion. The Iconians were a race of people who lived approximately 200,000 years before the common time of the Next Generation, and were a race vastly superior than any that currently existed in the galaxy. If you've ever seen Stargate, the Iconian gateways were kind of similar. They were a series of devices spread all across the galaxy that enabled the operators to traverse instantaneously to any point in space. Clearly a very powerful technology that offered great military advantage, but in Contagion, Data and Captain Picard, arguably two of the most brilliant Starfleet officers, were unable to determine how to use it. Presumably, given enough time and proper resources, the Federation or the Romulans would have eventually figured out how to use the gate. But it was so vastly superior to existing technology and riddled with so many safeguards that it would take a very, very long time before even any of the minor functions could be translated. As such, and this is just my opinion, the discovery of any subsequent Iconian gateways can absolutely be seen as something needing a swift response from the Federation to ensure its destruction, but the odds of any civilization figuring out its functionality is very slim. Despite this, and without verifying any of the information provided by the crew of the now destroyed Jem'Hadar warship, Benjamin Sisko enters into alliance with these Jem'Hadar warriors to hunt down the Jem'Hadar insurgents and destroy the Iconian gate. It seems that this episode is primarily about the Federation and its nonviolent ideals as a way to juxtapose the Federation's wholesomeness against the Dominion's evil nature. You have to remember that this is a part in the series where they're really ramping up the tensions between the two, and I think that this episode was kind of a way to say, yes, the Federation is good, and they just want the best for everybody, and the Dominion is pure evil. But in my opinion, this episode fails spectacularly at that. There are many methods the writers and the directors used to show this. This episode was actually directed by LeVar Burton, the actor for Geordi LaForge, my second favorite character in all of Star Trek. For instance, when Commander Worf gets into a scuffle with the Jem'Hadar second, Toman Torax, as punishment the Jem'Hadar first, or their commander, I'm gonna have a hard time saying this, Omediclon, kills Toman Torax as punishment and expects Sisko to do the same to Commander Worf. Of course, Benjamin says no and really revels in his moral superiority for not killing his officer over disobedience. The episode explores how the Jem'Hadar are dedicated to victory at all costs, with no regard to their own lives. This mentality is similar to the Klingon philosophy of honor above all and the desire to die in battle, but the Jem'Hadar show no instinct for self-preservation, whereas the Klingons use their mentality as a way of giving their lives more meaning. This is all well and good. It's great to get these contrasting ideologies compared, and especially right in this moment in this series, it's good to establish, like I said, the Federation is good, the Dominion is evil, But the message is undermined by the fact that the whole episode revolves around the crew of the Defiant allying themselves with the most evil organization in the galaxy to hunt down rebels fighting for freedom from the Dominion. Omediclon even tells Benjamin Sisko that as soon as this particular ordeal was over, he was going to do his best to kill him. And remember, like, the Jem'Hadar, there is a willingness behind their desire to serve the Dominion, but ultimately their devotion to the Dominion is predicated on their inherent addiction to Ketracel White and their need to have that continually in order to stay alive. You know, I think it's such a tricky episode, because we've just spent the first 3 acts setting up the Federation as a pacifist organization that tries to avoid unnecessary casualties. But then the culmination of this entire episode is the Federation massacring a group of freedom fighters seeking to free themselves from the influence of the Dominion. These are people that maybe don't have the ideals of the Federation, but at least they're similarly against the Dominion. And if they can be freed of their addiction to Ketracel White, then maybe they could truly be allies of the Federation, or at very least provide critical information to the Federation to assist them in their fight against the Dominion. And, you know, I get it. In the beginning of the episode, they were the instigators of this violence against the Federation, and I don't think that can easily be excused. But ultimately, them attacking the Federation was in pursuit of further attacking the Dominion, and them being a race of people that was genetically bred to be this kind of violence. Like, it's kind of expected of them to try to achieve their goals through that methodology. And, you know, it's hard to get past that, because never once in the episode does Benjamin Sisko ever stop to, like, consider their point of view. He never tries to contact these freedom fighters. He never even really mentions them, except for in the beginning, and every time he talks about killing all of them. And this is so out of character for Benjamin Sisko. He's really the epitome of Federation ideals, very anti-violence, and sees the good in everyone, you know. So this episode is just completely out of character for him. This episode, it even ends with Benjamin Sisko leaving the Jem'Hadar commander, Omediclon, on the planet's surface because they had not fully yet killed the entirety of the insurgency, only the majority of them, and Benjamin Sisko wishes him luck on that pursuit. You know, they've destroyed the Iconian Gate. That's what they came there for. And beyond that, killing everybody left alive on the planet's surface is just overkill and goes completely against established Federation ideals. I love Star Trek, and I love Star Trek Deep Space Nine, but ultimately, I view this as one of the weakest episodes. Had they eliminated the part about killing an entire group of freedom fighters, it would be fantastic. I would have loved to see that episode where they're exploring contrasting ideologies between the Dominion and the Federation. But it's ruined by, again, Benjamin Sisko murdering freedom fighters who are on the same side ultimately as the Federation. They may have different methods about going about that, but ultimately they are both fighting against the Dominion. It didn't quite go over the way Mr. Burton intended, and as such, I have to give this episode a C. It's just not one of the stronger episodes. I'm going to try to make some more of these, because I feel like I really rag on the show in this particular review of this episode. But, you know, ultimately, Star Trek Deep Space Nine is fantastic. It explores so many great themes about LGBTQ issues, you know, like interpersonal relationships, morality. It's got everything. This is just one kind of shitty episode. But yeah, thanks for listening to me rant about this. I was kind of debating, like, tying this into neoliberalism in real life, but oof. We have enough fascism in real life. I didn't really want to explore that in the context of Star Trek. So let's pretend like real life isn't happening and explore this just purely through Star Trek. Okay, thanks. Bye.